we want to wish a refuah shlema to all those who are ill during this difficult time period, and we send our condolences to those who have lost loved ones. We all stand together as a community, and the Ramaz, KJ, and greater community all continue to help one another and be there for one another. And on that note, we want to thank the frontline healthcare professionals who continue to do God's work. Thank you for everything you do and for how you do it. Tonight's Zoom is from Finances to Financiers. Alex Levin, class of 96, who's an award-winning pastry chef and works for the Schlau Restaurant Group. He leads and manages and executes pastry programs at the company's restaurants across the nation, which has been a very difficult moment for him during this time period, as you can imagine. After graduating from Yale and focusing on his career in management and finance, Alex decided to leave the structure of corporate America and attend the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, to follow a passion in pastry. He graduated at the top of his class and trained in New York under industry-leading pastry chefs. He then moved to DC and in 2013 became the pastry chef of Osteria Moini, where he built a reputation for himself and the restaurant during the span of a few of the years that he was there. He won national and local awards, and in 2016 won a Rammy Award, earning the title of Best Pastry Chef from the Restaurant Association Metropolitan Washington. He is also a star within our community, and we are so proud to have him with us this evening. Our moderator and co-host of the evening, Danièle Gorlin Lassner, class of 55, as she likes to say. She came to America from France with her mother and grandparents, and her father, who was already in America, greeted them very happily to have them back with him. Her home was French-speaking, and naturally, she went to the Lycée Français in New York. After an appearance in a play where she played the role of announcing the birth of Jesus in a holiday play, her parents decided to look at Jewish education, and Mrs. Lassner went to Ramaz. Danièle is a graduate as well of college, and then she pursued her graduate work in French and Spanish literature at Radcliffe, Harvard. After working for a brief time in publishing and marrying to the love of her life, Jules Lassner, she went on to live with him in Bogota close to a decade. After their sons Jamie and Andrew were born, both whom are graduates of Ramaz, they moved back to the US, and Mrs. Lassner taught French and Spanish at Ramaz and became the Dean of Admissions of the school and a key person in the school's development and in the entire administration. Today, after her retirement, she tutors adults in French and reviews cookbooks for the Jewish Book Council, and is one of those people that so many of us just love to spend time seeing and talking to. So what a privilege it is for us to have you with us this evening, Alex and Danièle. The rest is yours. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much. Very nice introduction. Thank you. Hello, Alex. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Mrs. Lassner.
I think one of the things that I'd like to wonder about with Alex is, how did this all begin? Tell us a little bit about your family background.
So I come from a wonderful family. I know you know pretty much every member of my family from, every generation, including my grandparents. And really this magic of pastry began when I was a very young boy at the Park Avenue Synagogue first, and then at Ramaz after that, when my grandmother, Martha Hadassah Nadich, who you knew very well, would come and pick me up from school on Friday afternoons and take me to their home, where she and my grandfather, Judah Nadich, would have a wonderful Shabbat meal for, the whole family. And we would cook and bake together. In particular, making challah and making the desserts were things that my grandmother let me at a very young age do all by myself, which I felt was, quite remarkable. And she came actually, which is something that you may not know, she came to the kindergarten that I was in Ramaz, and also to the Park Avenue Synagogue preschool that I went to actually teach all of the young students how to make challah in the classroom. And we did that as a project together. So even at the very, very beginning of my memories of life, the touch of dough and the feel of flour and the sweetness of sugar, I think the connection between such a loving grandparent and that activity is what kind of put that spark inside of me from the beginning.
So the family influence. I understand that you were going to, when you went to Yale, and your whole direction was really math. And how do you make the transition? Tell us a little bit about your transition.
Well, I think so it's interesting. Before, when I was in high school and before going to college, I always loved preparing meals. I like making parties, cooking and baking. I loved reading new recipes that might be from Gourmet Magazine when it was still around, and the New York Times for sure. And of course, our family's recipes were recipes that I had memorized at that point. And even when I went to college, and going to Yale was a really fun experience, and I learned so much. Was an applied math major and learned mathematics that, I don't even think I would understand what I learned now from what classes I took back then. But there's a few things that came out of that that really applied to my life as a pastry chef, actually, which is that in pastry, something that is not true for making chicken or roasting a salmon or doing something that my coworkers do, is that we are very precise as pastry chefs, very precise. In fact, I use the metric system in grams to measure things out with a scale, which is something that I'm sure you're familiar with from your background.
Yes.
But something that's very uncomfortable for so many Americans who prefer using cups and teaspoons. But there's a lot of imprecision in that, and things don't come out in the baking and pastry world in a very consistent way. So I learned how to apply my mathematics, which was my official major and the name of it, to my official new career, which is being a pastry chef. And so all of my recipes are actually in Excel, which is a pretty weird way to write recipes, I think, actually. But it allows for that precision to take place. And it's really hard for the people that I work with to make mistakes, because they're able to see the recipe scaled out, whether it's a 1 kilo batch or a 10 kilo batch or a 5 kilo batch, it's all scaled out for them on the spreadsheet. They're able to see it really very easily. Back when I was 22 and working out, right after school, I had to build, using Excel, these crazy mathematical models that would tell me the value of a company, or that would explain, what would happen if we combined two companies together. We didn't have, the software that exists today that make those calculations really simple. We had to use, old school programming methods, and it was a really, difficult way to live. And actually for me, it was something that I guess I just did because, in a way we live our lives and we kind of follow a path that's set up for us. And eventually something happens where, and for me, it was a moment where I was walking on the beach with a friend of mine, and I was thinking about maybe going to business school, and I thought maybe I would apply to a few different schools. And I did, and I applied to a bunch of schools, and I got accepted to some, I got rejected from some, waitlisted at some, and I secretly applied to the Culinary Institute of America, which was a place that my other grandparents who lived in Poughkeepsie would always take me to visit. So I was familiar with the school, and I knew it was the best place to get a culinary degree. And when I got accepted, after I got the letter in the mail, I remember going and meeting my parents and talking to them about it. We went for a walk down Broadway, which is something that we often would do. And I was wondering what their reaction would be. But like with everything that they've always been, my parents have always been so supportive of every decision that I've ever made, including that one. And so, it wasn't even really a discussion. It was just, that makes, I think they kind of said that makes a lot of sense, and they really.
How long is the program at the CIA?
So the program, you have to choose before you apply whether you're going to be in the baking and pastry track or whether you're going to be in the culinary track. And so I chose baking and pastry because that was my passion, I think, was in that area. So I chose that. And the program is just shy of 2 years. It can be 2 full years to get through the program. But what I did is I did my first year, and then I did an internship with one of the renowned pastry chefs that Kenny mentioned, Johnny Zini at Restaurant Jean-Georges, and then went back to school for the second half of the year, or the second half of the curriculum, which is the second year. And basically, it's so funny. I had such a great experience with that externship, which, I would go there at 10 in the morning and stay until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I wasn't paid. It was an unpaid internship, but I learned so much in that experience, and I'm so grateful for that experience. And I almost felt that when I went back to school was reviewing the things that I had already learned in this internship that I was so lucky to have been a part of. And I'm still so friendly with Chef Johnny, and he's done a lot of interesting things since he's left that position. And we keep in touch, and he's been a big impact on the decisions that I've made in my career as a chef.
The thing though that you mentioned in terms of you do weight, right? You do your cakes not by volume, but by weight.
The only time I write a recipe with cups and teaspoons is when a magazine or a newspaper asks me to convert it. No,
because I've noticed I have, for instance, relatives in Alsace and Paris, Switzerland, Israel, and when they send me a recipe, it's obviously always by weight.
The reason why
I'm just going to say one thing that drives me crazy, as Kenny mentioned that I do review cookbooks, is when a cookbook is not, it's not consistent. You'll have a recipe where part of it is in volumes, it's you have to make up your mind what are you doing, or put it in parentheses. But to alternate in one recipe is not a good idea.
No, I agree with that. And in particular for me, when I look at recipes, there's two ways that I write recipes. If it's bread, there's a way that bakers write a recipe using something called baker's percentage. And it's also by weight. It can be in grams or it can be in ounces and pounds if you prefer that system, but it has to be by weight. And everything is compared to the weight of the flour, the total weight of the flour. So and it's done in percentages. So you can say that 66% water, 100% is always going to be the flour. Salt is usually going to be about 4%, and yeast is going to be about 2%. I know that's a baguette right there, just knowing that percentage. I could write a recipe in grams or ounces knowing that relationship. In the non-bread world, we call those people breadheads, actually. So I'm not a breadhead, although I do love making focaccia and challah, and there's definitely breads that speak to me that I love making. I actually was chatting with my parents one night and suggested that my father start making a sourdough starter. And apparently they're making sourdough bread in addition to challahs every week, which is pretty cool. But you know, it's really interesting when you're not making bread. I can't understand a recipe unless it's in grams or ounces. I need to know the relationship among all the ingredients. And I can't tell you if a recipe is a good recipe or a bad recipe unless it's in the metric system specifically, because it takes too much time to convert the 16 ounces to the pound. It's so much easier in tens. So for me, everything is in grams and kilograms, and immediately you can see the relationship. If I look at a chocolate chip cookie recipe and see that a 1 kilo batch of that recipe has 20 grams of salt in it, I know that whoever wrote that recipe made a big mistake, because that's way too much salt for a kilo of dough. And I would probably suggest that we remove the 0, and maybe there was a typo there and it should be 2 grams or 3 grams for that amount of dough and not any more than that, which is also equal to half of a teaspoon if you happen to know the relationship between the two.
And you, I just want, on a side issue, I wanted to ask you, in terms of now and the pandemic, that this insanity that we're all going through, has it affected, or how has it affected the restaurant industry?
Well, I mean, it's affected the whole world, first of all. I mean, the restaurant industry was one of the biggest shocks, I think, to all of us that were in this industry. I'm in a unique position in the group that I work in, where I'm the pastry director for the group, but also I work in the restaurant, you know, like the group management of all the restaurants. And within, just to give you a sense of how crazy the first week of all this was, I flew to Boston to help open what we thought was going to be a new restaurant right by the Garden in Boston, and was there for a few nights, and then came back on a Wednesday, a day early, to then lay off literally every single person at 3 of the restaurants that are in DC, and then go to a bare bones staff of people working at the restaurants that we pivoted to continue working and doing what essentially became these massive food trucks. We did, in the beginning, we were really terrified. We did not do very well when it came to the carry out and delivery side of things. I mean, it was just sort of the icing on the cake for our business model, not the cake, you know, I mean, that, and suddenly we're relying on this to sustain us. But a lot of interesting things happen. You know, more is always revealed every day and every week, and we worked very, very hard. I mean, we did not take days off. We did jobs that we had not done in a very long time. Like, you would have seen me in the dish pit doing dishes and cleaning the restaurant and mopping and cleaning up at the end of the night. I mean, I'm happy to do that, and it was needed sometimes. And, you know, there's only so many people that we had doing the things that normally we would have a full staff of people to do everything. Eventually what happened is, you know, because of programs from the stimulus, that we were able to bring back people to our restaurants, and our business model changed, where we started to think outside the box. Like, we became a supermarket too. We decided to add that to our business, where people could order a, selection of really great meats or dairy products, or, get the complete box. It's like a CSA type deal where we'll even deliver it to you and you don't have to go to the supermarket. People were so afraid of going to the supermarket and going shopping. And so we kind of took care of that for a while. Now that business kind of died off. At another restaurant, we had this big window that we could open up, and we created a to-go margarita bar, if you can believe that. And, people would be waiting in line for Trader Joe's spaced out 6 feet by 6 feet, and would buy a 5 portion quart of mango margarita or, lime margarita and take it home with them. And so we started, and we also had our restaurant. So, we would, have the food and we'd have these other sort of side gigs that we would put together that when we were not allowed to be open to, make any revenue, we found other ways to make revenue and bring people back. And so we had a pretty good model of business. With desserts, I streamlined all of the desserts to be really simple and really, I would say, desserts that make you feel good, that you would want to make you feel better, like as if you always just had a bad day and you needed something to lift you up. So, the classics, like tiramisu at an Italian restaurant would be a dessert. And we wouldn't have 5 desserts, we'd have 2, very, very simple. As it turns out, I actually found myself with a lot of time at different points during the day. So I said, let's add a chocolate cake to the menu. And I would sit and make 100 chocolate cakes for the week, and people would buy them, and so it's interesting. I think we probably at one of our restaurants had, 5 desserts going at one point, and they were all really, really popular because I think people knew I was making them, and they were really delicious, and people really liked to eat a lot of food when they would order carryout during the pandemic and there was nothing to do. They would order a lot. I mean, we went from, seeing pitiful numbers to seeing really nice numbers every day, especially on Fridays and Saturdays. People really treated their weekends like their weekends. Like, Monday through Friday was Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday. I'm sure, the same was true for, the New York crew, and the same was true everywhere else. So I'm proud of the way we handled the situation. We were able to bring back a lot of people since we closed the restaurants. We reopened our patios about a month ago. And so I've actually felt very safe in the patio situation outside. I think it's a really good way to enjoy going to restaurants again, to be in the fresh air, to have your own space, to be 6 feet away from another group of people. I think it's a great thing. And I've gone, I had eaten so many meals in my own restaurants. So when we were able to start doing that, I went to a few of the restaurants in the area here in DC. And I have to say, everyone's been incredibly respectful of the guidelines that DC has for, for what we need to do to keep everybody as safe as possible amidst this pandemic, because the virus is still amongst us and we have to be respectful of that.
Absolutely. I want to ask you something else. Over the years, I've become very friendly with Mimi Sheraton, who used to be the New York Times critic, restaurant critic. And my late husband and I took her out to dinner to one of the local kosher meat restaurants. And it's very interesting. Her reaction was that the food was delicious, but somehow when it came to dessert, she said, I have to say that all these parva desserts do not compare to a really butter or cream or something dairy
Right.
dessert.
Well, actually, that ties into a question that I'm seeing from one of the panelists about,
Right.
What can we do about that?
Right.
So, and I'll tell you that I think of my grandmother who made delicious parve desserts, and I think that there's a lot of even better options now for ingredients to make desserts. So probably when Mimi Sheridan went with you, the options for fats that you could make desserts with were just margarine, Crisco.
Right.
I don't know what else there may have been, but there's definitely a lot of better options now. So one thing that I think is really very good, if you find a really good coconut fat that doesn't have a strong flavor, and there's a lot of different brands that are out there, and everybody has to find the brand that works for them. There's not one brand that I would recommend over another, but it's a really good option for a par of fat to use in lieu of butter for many different things. When I make challah, actually, sometimes I make it dairy, which is really almost sinful when you eat it because it's made with milk and butter, and you eat it and you're like, wow, this tastes almost like brioche. But I'll tell you that when you make it with olive oil, a really good olive oil, and water, it's as good. It's delicious. But I think about certain desserts that are just not meant to be made into a par of dessert, and I think that it's okay. Like when I go to my family's home, my mother makes a killer apple pie, and she'll use Crisco in her pie crust, which is, for making a pie crust, it's a great ingredient to use. Especially now that Crisco has removed so much of the unhealthy fats that are a problem for people's hearts and everything else. So, I think, you have to think about what you're making and whether it's suitable for par-of-ness or not. I think about chocolate mousse, and I think about what chocolate mousse tastes like when it's made without heavy cream. And it's okay. It's rich. The chocolate is doing its job and the eggs that are in it are doing its job, but it's missing the heavy cream, and you're never going to find a substitute for something that tastes like heavy cream. So I would say, like with that, Mimi's right. Like if you ordered a chocolate mousse with strawberries at Le Marais, you might be disappointed with the outcome there. But I wanted to just go back to the substitutes question. I think that there's a lot of really good dairy substitutes out there in the world right now. I mean, people have dairy allergies. Of course, when you're Jewish and kosher, you're not mixing any dairy with meat. And so I think, remembering that if you need a solid fat to make a cookie, that you should try using coconut fat. That's a really good one. If you're comfortable using Crisco for pie crusts, I would definitely recommend something like that. If there's a specific dessert that somebody is trying to convert into, okay, it says, it's a cake and it has 2 sticks of butter in it, and instead I'm going to put 2 sticks of margarine, it's going to taste different. It's just not going to taste the same. But maybe instead of putting into that cake, 1 tablespoon of vanilla, or, in our other language, 15 grams of vanilla. Maybe we'll put in 30 or 45 grams to make the flavor a little bit more powerful. And think about how we can, add different herbs to something that may help bring out other flavors that the butter would be carrying, which we're not going to have,
I'm curious, when you're home and you're not working you are in your own kitchen, do you bake or cook a lot, or when you're home you sort of, not really get involved with that?
That's a really good question. I oscillate. I go up and down with my cooking at home. During the pandemic, I have not done as much cooking at home as I had done before. And the reason being is that it's been very communal for me to finish the night with the team that I'm working with and to eat some food together. And so, you know, we'll cook something and we'll sit and eat together usually. You know, also, it's not very uncommon for me and one of my coworkers to eat at one of our restaurants at the end of the night. So we end up eating at a lot of our own restaurants, and so I don't eat a lot of I don't make a lot of food at home. When I do go to the other extreme, I definitely love to make and have all the equipment to make everything at home. So it may take me a little bit more time because I don't have as much space, and I have to, you know, make sure that I'm doing my own dishes and keeping up with all the mess that gets created in a different way. But I love to have in the freezer a ready to be pulled out and thawed raw challah that I can let proof and bake. You know, I have a couple of them in my freezer right now. There's definitely a container of frozen rugelach that if I ever get a little craving for something sweet, maybe at, you know, 9 o'clock at night, I'll, you know, put the oven on and, you know, sprinkle a little bit of turbinado sugar on top and throw a few in the oven. But I also, you know, do a lot of work, obviously, in restaurants. So it's not always uncommon for me to say, you know, I'm going to make something in the restaurant and then also bring it home with me.
I'm just curious, do you use dry yeast or not?
So I'm actually a really, I have a very, very strong opinion about yeast. Very strong. So the best yeast that exists is the SAF instant yeast. It's a gold package. You can buy it on Amazon.com. Definitely get it. It is the best yeast. It's a dry yeast. You mix it with flour. It doesn't have to proof. You can put it into a few different pint containers if you have them at home. You can freeze some of it if you don't want to use it right away. You can, you know, have some in the refrigerator. It's good for a very long time. It lasts for a while. There's a relationship between that and fresh yeast, which is also really good to use. Fresh yeast, if you can find it, it's not always easy to find in the supermarket. It's refrigerated. The relationship is that if you see a recipe and it's by weight, so whatever the weight of the fresh yeast is, you divide it by 3, and that's the amount of dry yeast that you're going to use in the recipe.
How do you keep challah fresh?
How do you keep challah fresh? Okay. Well, the best way to keep challah fresh is to basically make sure you eat it all in one sitting, right? And actually, I'll tell you that it's really unusual to see a challah, you know, not meet its end at the end of a meal. I think usually at least one. If you break into the second challah, I think that by the end of the weekend, between you know, eating it with some cream cheese, French toast, it's probably met its end pretty quickly as well. But if you want to keep it longer, I would recommend slicing it and putting it into a Ziploc freezer bag and put it in the freezer and then just put it in the toaster and then toast it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Do you ever make a water challah?
A water challah? I've never made a water challah before. I've made a few recipes that are not my own. I've made the recipe from the New York Times that uses fresh orange juice, which is a great recipe. I would recommend that one. Some of my mother's friends have recipes for challahs, and they're wonderful challah makers. I've made some of their recipes too, but I've never made a water challah before. So I'll have to look that up and learn about it and make one.
Because as I say, my mother coming from Alsace, their tradition, they ate water challahs, and I grew up on that. It's very good. It's totally different experience than an egg challah, but it's wonderful. Do you have your own cookbook? Are you thinking of writing one, or where can one get your recipes?
That's a work in progress, actually. So there's a couple of people that have approached me from friends of mine that have worked at the Washington Post. One of them is retired. One of them still works there. Both of them have approached me about writing cookbooks, and I have in my encyclopedia on Dropbox so many recipes of, it could be a cookbook about anything at this point. But I think there's some definite themes that I've been thinking about, and there's one person that I'm starting to talk to a little bit more seriously about it. And who knows? Right now is not the right time, because amidst this pandemic, I'm really working almost every day of the week. Usually one day I take off, but otherwise I'm just really busy, and it takes time to write a book. And to work with somebody that's a writer would be the way to go for me, rather than do it myself. I definitely have the content and would want to collaborate with somebody to do it together.
How do you oversee these different restaurants and everything? That must not be easy.
It's not easy. And so before the pandemic, what happened was we had a full staff of people. And so I would go and spend time. I'd fly to California. I'd fly to Santa Fe and work, with the team there and teach them how to have a proper dessert menu, and would go out there as part of my job, a lot of traveling around. So I'd go to Boston. I would go, obviously in DC with the restaurants here, circulating around and teaching the teams how to prepare desserts as the seasons change. And there might be a dessert that's incredibly popular, like at the Rigsby, there was a dessert that was called the pot brownie sundae. It's kind of a pun in that it was prepared in a pot, and people would get it and go bananas over it. It had all your must-have items in a sundae. Lots of ice cream, hot fudge, whipped cream. This pot was filled with a ganache-filled brownie on the bottom. And it was served warm and cold at the same time. It was really a great dessert. So we never changed that dessert, but the other ones we would change pretty regularly. And I would be involved in, training first the hourly employees, but then the executive chefs would want to get involved in it too. They would want to learn the desserts. And so I would I found that actually was the best approach, when I could get the executive chefs that would have been in the culinary side of things at the CIA, not the pastry side of things, to take a strong interest in the dessert menu, so that they knew how to make every component of the dessert that was on the menu, and also help in training the team that would be working with them to be a part of that. It took a lot of pressure off of me not being able to be in every place at the same time.
Do you ever make gluten-free or nut-free desserts?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think gluten-free desserts are easy these days, because there's so many great flours that you can buy, that even from King Arthur, there's a great gluten-free flour. So pretty much every recipe, again, if you're following it by weight, you can substitute gram for gram the gluten-free flour and have a pretty good outcome. Breads are a little bit more complicated. When you're making a gluten-free bread, I recommend using a recipe and following it very closely from somebody that has a great book that focuses just on that. But otherwise, for cakes and for cookies and for anything that's a dough, I mean, except for bread, there's so many good options. For anything with nuts, I mean, if you have an allergy to nuts, I'm so sorry. Like, I love snacking on cashews and walnuts and, pretty much everything, even peanuts that are not really nuts. Like, it's still one of my favorite joys in life is to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich once in a while. But the truth is that we have to be very careful about allergies. And so, no way would I ever create a menu where every single item on the menu, every single option is full of nuts. There's always going to be ways of removing the allergens if they're part of the dessert, or on the menu the chefs do the same thing.
What are your
I think
favorite desserts to make? Your favorites to eat?
favorite dessert to make is going to be ice cream, and coming up with new and interesting flavors. And I think that's definitely, even opening an ice cream shop could be a lot of fun, I think. Favorite thing to eat, I think, is the hazelnut chocolate crunch rugelach that I make is really, really good. Maybe tied with, and again, it's kind of going back to the Jewish roots, right? Going back to my grandmother's recipe for challah, which is so great. Great recipe. A lot of these recipes, you asked where can you find them? A lot of them are actually published. If you Google them, you can find them on different magazines. There was an article that Joan Nathan wrote about me in the New York Times a few years ago. And there's a great honey cake recipe that's there, and a great recipe for a peach or plum tart, depending on your preference. You can make one or the other. And in Washington, where I live, Washington Post has done a really nice job by some of my recipes, and I've gotten to become very friendly with the food team that writes for the Post, even the food critic there, Tom Sietsma, and the people that are more creative there, that work in designing and creating the actual food section, not just critiquing restaurants.
Are there pastry chefs that you highly, highly regard?
Well, in Washington, there's so many great pastry chefs now. When I first moved here, there were just a few of us. There weren't a lot. There were maybe 6 or 7. I think Tiffany McIsaac was one. Fabrice Bendano was another one. There really weren't very many. Naomi Gallego. Now there's 30 or 40 solid pastry chefs. I don't even know a lot of them, but I try to meet them and go to. We socialize together at least once a year. We do a gathering, usually during the holidays, and everybody makes a cookie or something, and we kind of do a little trade of sorts. And actually, there was a really cool. I don't know if you heard about it, but there was a really cool. Recently, there was a Bakers Against Racism campaign that some pastry chefs here in Washington, D.C. organized, and it raised over $1 million. It went viral across the United States. And so it's amazing what the community here has here in Washington in terms of what's developed over the years. And I'm so, honored to have been a part of it. It was really by luck that I made the decision to move here. I thought I would live in New York my whole life, really, like all good New Yorkers think and believe, right? But when my 1 year of working at Cafe Boulud came to an end, and the opportunity to become a pastry chef right away without becoming a sous chef first, and putting in years and years and years of those dues, I kind of jumped ahead and moved down here, and again, supportive family helped a lot. And I had a really great partner in the executive chef of the restaurant, Matt Adler is his name, supporting all the different things that I wanted to do. And I had a really great platform there to explore what it really means to be a pastry chef with a team of people, a station, with a lot of pressure to change the dessert menu very frequently with that kind of power behind you. I had 4 people working for me in one department. I mean, honestly, now I don't know that I would put my seal as a business person to that. I think it's a waste of labor dollars in a way. But at the time, I wasn't responsible for managing the P&L of the restaurant. So I was lucky to be a part of a situation that allowed me to, have these incredible desserts that made the restaurant pretty well known at the time.
It's an interesting thing. There's a cookie. It's like a shortbread cookie, but it's marvelous. In German or Alsatian, they call it Zimtkuchen, which is like it's a shortbread, and you sprinkle it with the sugar and cinnamon, and then you cut it in diamonds. And I remember my mother making them and my grandmother making them, and their comment was always that it depends how close to the rind you were, whether you put in baking powder or not. Those who lived closer did this, the others did that.
Wait, so I have a question for you, Mrs. Lassner. I need to know from the panelists, what is your favorite dessert?
My favorite dessert, I would have to say, truthfully, my late mother's open-faced plum tart or open-faced blueberry tart. And in summer, I mean, my mother would make one after another. Open-faced were marvelous, and she would make this, I don't know what you call it. Is it a type of custard, a little bit with eggs and maybe milk or substitute, and put that over the tart so you could see a little white on the open-faced. But that, truthfully, oh, that was marvelous. And of course now, as I get younger and younger, my favorite is good chocolate, but not a bland chocolate cake, but a really, and you can taste the chocolate, and you know the chocolate is of good quality.
Right.
That, you know, would be terrific.
So Kenny asks us also if there are any star kosher pastry chefs that I know of. So I'll forgive me that I don't know their names, but when I recently, not actually so recently, but I went to Israel on a trip via the Schusterman Foundation called Reality Taste, with a bunch of I guess you could say Jewish food influencers, but not everybody on the trip was Jewish. So I guess you shouldn't say Jewish food influencers. A bunch of people from the United States went together to Israel to experience Jewish food. And we met and went to some of the most incredible restaurants. And it was a mix of different kinds of restaurants. In Jerusalem, we went to Eucalyptus, which is a kosher restaurant right by the old city. And they have a really great pastry chef there who I met, but I can't remember their name. That restaurant's a really famous restaurant. I don't know that the pastry chef is very famous, but the chef of the restaurant definitely is. And the thing that's kind of cool about that restaurant is that they try to use ingredients only that might have been from the Bible. So if it wasn't if the ingredient is something that's kind of new and cool, it's not there. It's got to be something that was listed in the Bible for them to use it in the restaurant. We did also travel around to a number of kosher restaurants, and there were some fabulous desserts that we had. And again, I would meet the chefs, but not usually the pastry chefs. But I think in Israel, there must be at least a handful of them.
You mentioned Israel. I just thought of something. When we were in Israel, and my husband, who enjoyed a martini in a martini glass, asked the waiter, do you have a martini glass? Betach. And what he brings over is a regular glass, and it says martini vermouth on the bottom. So he said, you see, of course we have it. Well, so much for that. Are you friendly with your Ramaz former students? I mean, your classmates, anyone?
Absolutely, yeah. So I had a lot of really close friends at Ramaz. My whole grade actually is still pretty much in touch with each other in different, in different groups in a way. And I feel blessed that we still refer to Neely Doft, for example, as new, because she arrived in 9th grade and not part of the old group of students that were part of the lower school. I think actually if you started anytime after kindergarten, you were considered new. So she was in good company with anyone else that arrived after that challah making class with my grandmother. right before we started our Zoom, Miriam Fried, who's now Miriam Klein, was texting me to tell us that we had a little issue with the time saying 8 o'clock instead of 7:30. So,
Oh, yeah,
and,
I just heard that, yeah.
right, and so she was the one that helped us. So thank you, Miriam, if you're listening. And Andrea Zimmern, who is just a superstar right now, saving the world with her work as a doctor. Following what she does, and always trying to see her when I go to New York. Actually, I saw Miriam and her kids right before the pandemic became a thing. They were at the APAC conference here in New York, in DC, and we went on a little tour of Washington. I drove them around and showed them the monuments, and
A beautiful city, beautiful.
It's a beautiful city. Yeah, it's even more beautiful now, just because it's not as full of people running around. But it's interesting you ask about my relationships from Ramaz, and they're still such good friends and memories of such great people that are still with me. And also my families my family is still very close with the Shachters and the Grivitzes, and so you know how it is. It's a small world.
Yeah, and I went to Ramaz in my graduating class. I think we were 19 students, and I'm still in touch with a few of them. What's your day like in non-COVID times?
So I would say that normally, when I was working at just one restaurant, I would get up pretty early. I'd get up at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. If I was opening the restaurant, meaning if I was making the bread and opening the station and getting things organized for the day, and would work until about 11 hours later. And then if I was working to close the restaurant, then I would probably get there at around 2 o'clock and then stay until whenever the last person ordered dessert. And I would literally have the station cleaned up, ready to roll, and home 10 minutes later. That would be my kind of, in New York, it was the same thing.
Were you involved in pop-up bakeries for the Jewish holidays?
Definitely so then fast forward to, the most recent Rosh Hashanah was the 5th time that I did a pop-up bakery for the Jewish holidays. I had done them for both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur the year before, where I did food for the breakfast. But they're really popular here in DC. There's not a lot of Jewish food, actually. It's sort of sad in a way. There's not a lot of, it's not like New York. DC is very different. And so to create, challah and rugelach and honey cakes, and, people want that kind of food. And so I would create massive amounts and create a system to be able to mass produce them in a very high quality way. And that's what we did. And so me and really one other person, we would do it together. And, we'd find usually a third person to handle logistics a little bit, and, kind of gather a crew together to help and step out of their normal days and help do this for about a week. And we would finish right in time for me to then get on a train and go up to New York and see my family.
As we're winding down, have you ever served some famous people?
So I had the privilege of cooking in the West Wing of the White House during the Obama years 3 times, which was really thrilling. The first time it was particularly thrilling just to be there, and to be, they had a program basically where, because the people that work at the White House never have a chance to go out to restaurants, they would bring restaurants to the West Wing. And so we went there, and I still remember the desserts that we made and all the food. Everything was so great. And all we wanted to know was whether the president and his wife ate the food, which we didn't know the first year. But it was still super thrilling. Second year was also thrilling, but we had been there once before. So the second time was not as thrilling as the first. But the third time was really thrilling because we not only got snuck into the Oval Office with an illegal picture that we were able to take when the Secret Service looked the other way, but we also were able, we know that the president ate our food, which we were very happy about. Even though it was Italian food and not really on his diet, he cheated and, you know, maybe with his cigarette that he wasn't supposed to smoke, you know, had a bowl of pasta and had dessert. So I was really happy about that. And, you know, otherwise in Washington, we cook for, you know, famous politicians all the time. I mean, at the Rigsby, when it was open, you might have, you know, somebody from, you know, the Trump administration sitting at one banquet, you know, that is on Fox doing an interview, and you might have, you know, Senator Warren at a table like 3 tables away from you know, from them. And that's the nature of Washington, you know. And when you walk into a restaurant, it's sort of the neutral zone. Politics are left outside. Everyone's welcome. We don't care who, you know, what your affiliations are or what your beliefs are.
I'm wondering, does the question of allergies ever come up?
They do, yeah. So one of the first questions that a server is going to ask a table is if anybody has any allergies or dietary restrictions, so that we can properly alert the kitchen about those issues so that we don't kill anybody by mistake when they're eating dinner at the restaurant.
Right. What's the most popular allergy? Nuts?
I think the most popular allergies are going to be nuts, but there's definitely celiac as well. That's a big one too. You know, all the allergies come up once in a while. There's some people that even show up with a card that specifies what allergies they have, so that they can be very clear and not forget to tell, you know, the server in the kitchen what we need to know.
All right. I want to thank you very, very much, Alex. It's wonderful. It's been a great time speaking to you, and I hope we have the chance to chat again.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say thank you to Kenny for organizing this, and also thank you to you for being available to do this with me. I was so honored when you agreed to be the moderator. And, you know, you were never my teacher, which was a great sadness of mine. You know, as
mine too. I regret, right?
But we were
I would like to say to both of you, to you, Alex, and to you, Danielle, thank you for honoring us with this evening's program. You both really gave us a tremendous amount in so many different ways and are inspiring. And I think many of us are already Googling your recipes, Alex, because you whet our appetites for sure. And we are looking forward to possibly having a part 2 to this, where maybe we can even go into some specific recipes, because it sounds like people would be really interested. I just want to let everybody know that we continue to have these kinds of Zoom programs available to all of our constituencies, and we are welcoming of people who have ideas and thoughts of things, of people they'd like to share and have come on. Please share them with us. If you'd like to sponsor those programs or be a part of the sponsorship, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you once again to all of you for joining us this evening. Alex, Danielle, may you continue to be healthy, and may you continue to grace us with all the amazing things that you accomplish every day. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.